Welcome, everyone. I am Rick Shetler. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Municipal League. More information on the League is at pml.org. Really pleased to have the leadership of the League here today, who I'll introduce in a second, but also certainly all the members of the media, and a special thanks to our friends and partners at the National League of Cities. We're here today to talk about what's happening in Washington, or what's not happening in Washington, and why Pennsylvania municipalities are especially vulnerable, and what we need assistance with. And we're going to have our folks speak to each of their communities, but I kind of wanted to lay the groundwork a little bit. You know, if we're going to have a full recovery in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, local governments have to recover too. We have some of our major cities here today, but we also have some of our smaller hubs, if you will, and our core communities that are essential for Pennsylvania to move forward. I'm really concerned if nothing happens at the federal level to assist us, that the state programs, Act 47, the Strategic Management Planning Program, which is the sort of the, before Act 47, are going to be overwhelmed. And what is the Commonwealth going to do? And for those who don't know, Act 47 is sort of our municipal bankruptcy, but not municipal bankruptcy program. And having a whole bunch of our communities having to move into that is bad for the economy of the Commonwealth, certainly devastating for those communities, but not a prospect that I would hope that our congressional delegation would want. So we really feel like, you know, we've seen all these things happen around us. Many of the businesses and the communities that are going to speak today have been affected by the PPP, et cetera. But we as local governments are employers, rather large employers. And the folks we employ are police and fire, other public safety personnel. If we start to see substantial layoffs in those, what does that mean for the overall employment picture, and what impact it's going to have on those communities and the Commonwealth? We've seen a couple of studies now that have indicated, the NLC study, research study, indicated that we could be seeing 40% of a revenue loss in our communities. Much of that has to do with what will happen with Pennsylvania's unemployment rate. The Independent Fiscal Office, which is a creature of the General Assembly, has indicated tens of millions of dollars in lost revenue to municipalities. They only look at the property tax and the earned income tax. We know many of you are going to be looking at the gross receipts tax, parking revenues. All those things will be affected, and that's what moves that number up. So today we're here to hear some individual stories. I'm going to call on each one of our folks. Let me just add one thing. One of the reasons that we need this next stimulus, the package that's being discussed, is because we've got nothing to date. The CARES Act has not trickled down to us for the most part. And we know Councilman Green from Philadelphia is here, who were one of the directs, but nobody else. The state hasn't allocated anything. We need to have direct funding from the federal government to help our communities. So let me take a second and introduce the folks that are here. They're going to give 2 minutes of opening remarks, and then I'll pose some questions to them, and we'll go from there. And for the media folks, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. What I'd ask you to do, if you have a question, is to go to the chat box, put your name and your affiliation there, and then Debbie Bidding, our Director of Communications, will call on you as we go through this process. So opening remarks, first of all, the President of the Pennsylvania Municipal League, Mayor Matt Pacifico from the city of Altoona. Mayor?
Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'd just like to start out by saying Altoona is not unlike any of the other communities that my colleagues here today represent. We're facing the same challenges, and nobody knows when we're going to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic or what the economy is going to look like when we do. Altoona is a city with about 250 full-time employees. About 70% of our annual expenses are labor costs, and 2/3 of those costs are public safety, namely police and fire. Our expenses outside of staff are fixed, like debt service, pension obligations, unfunded state and federal mandates. And it's going to be impossible to balance our budget next year without employee reductions, including police officers and firefighters. Rick mentioned Act 47. Altoona emerged from Act 47 in 2017, and if the economy declines like many people are predicting, then there's a very strong chance that the city will be forced back into Act 47. This is not a partisan issue. Republican and Democrat mayors are all seeing the same effects and feeling the same effects on their cities and their budgets. We're asking Congress to work together on a solution that provides local assistance to municipalities so that we can continue to provide the services that are important to our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. Next up is Councilmember Derek Green, the first Vice President of the League from the City of Philadelphia. Councilmember.
Thank you, Rick, and I want to thank all of my colleagues on this call that we can to address the issues in our community. This is an issue that's so important, not just for the city of Philadelphia, but cities all around the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This year, our city, we had initially a $649 million deficit that ballooned to $749 million when our revenue estimates did not meet our projections in May. So this is an issue that has had a significant impact in the city of Philadelphia. Unfortunately, we are the largest big city in the nation with the highest level of poverty at 26%. We're currently dealing with a gun violence issue that if we don't have the resources in our city, and we had to cut a police class because of lack of resources due to COVID-19, it's impacting our city. We also had to cut our commerce department in a significant way. And that's the department we need to help businesses get back to where they need to be. But Philadelphia is not an island. The issues that impact Altoona, Lancaster, Easton also impact Philadelphia. The residents in the city of Philadelphia, some work in the city, some work outside the city. So if our region is not doing well, then Philadelphia is not doing well. And if Philadelphia and the region is not doing well, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is not doing well. All of these issues are interconnected. That's why all cities, not only in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but around the nation, are essential. That's why we, with the National League of Cities, the Pennsylvania Municipal League, are doing all that we can to implore upon Congress that we need the resources back in our cities to make sure that our police, our fire, and all the quality services that we need to provide to our constituents are there. Thank you, Rick.
Next up is the second Vice President of the Municipal League, Mayor Dineen Sarachi from the City of Lancaster.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning to talk about this really critical issue related to our municipal and local governments here in Pennsylvania. My name is Dineen Sarachi. I'm the mayor of the City of Lancaster, population of 60,000, annual budget of about 200 million, employing approximately 550 staff. In addition to all the public safety, parks, streets, and so on, we are also operators of wastewater and water treatment facilities for the city and the surrounding suburbs. We furloughed about 12% of our staff in April. Our hardest hit department was, in fact, Public Works. We've been able to bring some of those staff back only because we're no longer subcontracting as much work externally. So the decisions that we're making in terms of how to keep our staff employed are having ripple effects in our local economy here in Lancaster. Fortunately, right now, we are not seeing the worst case scenario play out in Lancaster yet. We have been able to weather so far the pandemic. But prior to the pandemic, I and residents and other business community members were sounding the alarm for fiscal year 2021, which for us begins in January. We are bracing for a recession. I don't know why we're not talking about a recession, but that's what we're looking at. We have 5 major revenue sources that are extremely sensitive to the economy: earned income tax, real estate transfer taxes, parking, building permits, and local service taxes. While real estate taxes tend to remain stable during recessionary periods, these other revenue sources are not so stable. To give an example of how sensitive, let's talk about the earned income tax for a moment. If revenues for earned income tax decline by 3% over the next 2 years in 2021 and 2022, which is half of the decline that we experienced during the Great Recession, and we know we're talking about something that on a magnitude of much, much larger in scale and scope, we would be facing a $5 million less in earned income tax revenues over a 5-year period. This is $5 million for a city of Lancaster. That may not sound like much in Washington, D.C. when we're talking about trillion-dollar packages, but here in Lancaster City, I can tell you that that is a huge, huge hurdle that we will not ever be able to clear with the tools that we have available to us related to revenue. That means that our community, which is 40% Hispanic, 20% African American, the largest concentration of poverty in the county, we will not recover, and we will not be able to create the kind of enabling environment that has helped Lancaster be the strong city in South Central Pennsylvania that it is today. We have to be thinking long-term about how to protect cities like Lancaster, which serve as an economic hub. To Councilman Green's point, we are a regional anchor into our economy, and we can't just turn off the lights at our water treatment plant to save money and expect to serve 130,000 customers every day without fail. This is just one example of the critical services that we are providing, and one of the ways, very sensitive ways, in which our city will be affected by a long-term recession. And that's what's ahead, and this is why we need federal support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Appreciate it. Next up, I'm not sure, Mayor Mike Lombardo from the city of Pittston, who is our Democratic Legislative Co-Chair. You out there, Mayor? All right, we're gonna move on. If the mayor comes on, we'll bring him back. Pleased to have Mayor Sal Panto, City of Easton, who is a past president of Pennsylvania Municipal League. Mayor Panto, please.
Thank you, Rick, and I am Sal Panto. I'm the mayor of the wonderful city of Easton, Pennsylvania. And prior to March, we were experiencing a wonderful renaissance, increasing our population, increasing our economy, increasing jobs, and at the same time, decreasing crime for the last 13 years. Our annual budget is approximately $60 million with a general fund of approximately $32 million. We have no major corporations within our city boundary. Our economy is based solely on the hundreds of small businesses, locally owned by local people. Everything we worked for the last 12 years has been stymied by COVID-19 pandemic. Our budget is based on the strength of our economy. The closure of the economy due to COVID is resulting in loss of revenues to the city of Easton of $5.5 million. And as Mayor Sarachi said, that's a lot of money to Easton and everywhere else in Pennsylvania, except for maybe in Washington. And even with the Councilmember Green, it's as Mayor Nutter used to say, our problems are the same. It's just a number of zeros behind the first number. The impact is cutting important capital projects that not only contributes to our economy, but also provides jobs. We're also furloughed 30% of our employees, 81, and we're permanently cutting our staff. Without the direct support from the federal government, we have no choice but to lay off first responders, police, fire, and other important frontline employees. The very people that deal with pandemic every single day with our residents and visitors to our community. I am proud to join these local leaders as a member of the board of directors of the National League of Cities, as a former president of the Pennsylvania Municipal League. I know that we need to speak as one voice, and that's what we're trying to do today. And as a Commonwealth, not just as a city or a town or a village, but as a Commonwealth, we're telling you that we are working hard every day, making the tough decisions to deal with this pandemic. I cannot close without saying, if the federal government is really interested in a national economic recovery, you can't do it without a national recovery in our cities, towns, and villages. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Panto. Mayor Peduto is running late. Mayor Bill Peduto from the city of Pittsburgh, a past president of LIG, but I just want to make sure if he's out there that he can go ahead. Don't think he is. So hopefully we'll bring him in when we do the questions. I want to recognize one other person, Mayor Doug Baker of the city of Franklin, who's our Republican legislative co-chair. Couldn't be with us today, but certainly is very much part of what this league is doing. So let me pose some questions to our mayors and council member, and some of the question I'm going to ask might be a bit repetitious to what you said already, but please expand on it. And that is, what are the top challenges you're facing relative to your budget, maintaining services that you need, and the overall workforce of your municipality? Mayor Pacifico, if I can start with you.
I think, well, the top challenge, the most obvious one is where do we find the lost revenue from? Like I said, in Altoona, we have about 250 employees, and when 70% of your labor costs or 70% of your expenses are labor costs, that doesn't leave a lot of room to look at other programs or other departments to trim anywhere. Also, there's just so many unknowns surrounding all of this. An example is with real estate tax. We're not going to know until the end of 2021 really who didn't pay their real estate taxes for 2020. So in Altoona, our real estate tax represents about $10 million of our budget. So if 5% of property owners in the city of Altoona are unable to pay their taxes, God forbid, that's $500,000 in lost revenue that we're going to have to try to find next year, that we won't even know about until next year. So there's a lot of unknowns surrounding all of this, and it's kind of scary, really.
Thank you, member. Councilmember Green, same question. I'll be glad to repeat the question too, if you'd like.
Yeah, Rick, thank you for that question. Mayor Pacifico really articulated the issue that's so challenging for all of us is the unknown. I mean, literally, we went from a $649 million deficit to $749. That's about $100 million, and we had to come up with the dollars by doing a pension restructuring. The mayor, $1 billion, and the concern is the unknown. We had to furlough 450 people. We're not sure what will be, for July and August and September. And I'm really concerned about next year's budget as we go into the FY22 budget. How are we going to deal with those issues when we know that revenue is down? A number of businesses have been closed. PPP kept some open, but for cities like Philadelphia, like Lancaster, Easton, we're having to make hard decisions like first responders, not having some of the classes that we normally have, and looking at how we provide those critical safety needs to our constituents. And this is an issue that's not just a Philadelphia issue or a Pittsburgh issue or Altoona or Pittston or Easton or Lancaster issue. It's an issue that impacts the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's why it's so important. Congress must act now.
Thank you, council member. Appreciate it. Mayor Panto, you feel that question?
Easton has reverted to mostly a tourism economy. So when the closure of our Crayola experience, our state theater, that means a big loss of over $500,000 a year. Then you have that related to that is your parking revenues, which the city makes about $1.5 million a year on parking from all these visitors coming to our city, 400,000 to Crayola, et cetera. So there's, probably close to $1 million of the deficit. And then the casino in Bethlehem as the county seat, we get a small portion of the shared revenue there, and that's about $1.3 million a year. Our normal casino check for the quarter is about anywhere from $275,000, $300,000. For the second quarter was $5,000. That's real dollars that the city has to make up. And that's why we laid off 30% of our employment. Obviously, like Mayor Sarachi says, your earned income tax, your business privilege tax, all those things are really important to the city. It's the only place we get money from. Our tax revenue for real estate taxes, and we're probably about 5% also, as Mayor Pacifico said, but it's a minimal amount of our budget. It's $8 million of a $60 million budget. It's very, very small potatoes when you're looking at it overall. But every dollar right now is going to count. So I think the biggest problem we're having with COVID-19 is the economy shut down. And cities, towns, and villages make their budget, they base their budget on the strength of the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, very much. Mayor Sarachi, if you would take that question, please.
Yes, and so just listening to my colleagues and Mayor Panto and Easton, you know, we have the opposite problem. We have the majority of our revenues are coming from property taxes. We have the highest property tax rate in the county by a magnitude of 3 times. And so when we're talking about 11.7 mils and the burden that is on our taxpayers related to property taxes, where do you go? There is not a scenario that it is likely that we can raise our way out of this situation with property taxes, which is the tool that we have in the city of Lancaster. And this is what's unique about communities across the country. We all have these different kinds of tools and resources in which we can raise revenues. But the one thing that is not different about cities across the country is the labor-intensive services that we all provide: police, fire suppression, code enforcement. All of these things cost over 75% of our budget. They are the core of what city government does and delivers. And so that is our #1 challenge. How do we continue to move to provide the essential services that everyone relies on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in our case, water and sewer on top of fire, police, parks, etc., and manage in the midst of this kind of pandemic, the likes of which, the magnitude of which we have never seen before. I mean, I used to remember my predecessor talking about the Great Recession and the decisions that they made. Those decisions and that roadmap got thrown out the window on April 1st.
Appreciate it. I want to recognize Mayor Bill Peduto has joined us. And Mayor from the city of Pittsburgh, a past president of the league. I'm glad to have the mayor here. I'll pose the question that the other mayors and council member have answered. What are the top challenges you're facing with respect to your budget? How do you maintain services? And what about the municipal workforce in the city of Pittsburgh? What impact do you see having there, Mayor? Please.
There we go. Right now, the city of Pittsburgh is facing anywhere between a 17 and 20% anticipated reduction in revenue by the end of the year. What does that mean? It means that out of a $600 million operating budget, we're short about $100 million. So we have been cutting non-personnel costs across the board 10% through every department. But what we're also seeing are increased costs because of COVID, increased costs, particularly within public safety. Now, it's a two-edged sword. You on one hand are required to provide the public safety services that are absolutely necessary, and on the other hand, under the tax structure in the state of Pennsylvania, you're losing the revenue that you would once have had. Within Pittsburgh, it's amusement tax, it's parking tax. It's not simply the payroll or the property. It is the multitude of other sources that we absolutely rely on to pay the bills. So as we put together a budget for next year, without assistance from the federal level, without direct assistance from the federal level, we'll be looking at a budget which will have $100 million shortfall, which will have to be made up through personnel. A 10% across the board cut through every department of the city of Pittsburgh would have 400 people losing their jobs, and it won't even make up the difference of where our deficit is.
Thank you, Mayor Peduto. Appreciate it. Next question is, and all of you have sort of alluded to this, but maybe we can get a little bit more into the weeds. Either because of the loss of revenue or additional expenses that you've incurred, what are you looking at in terms of the actual services that may have to be cut? What is that going to affect in terms of services? And then what do you see, because there's a direct relationship, and we heard a little bit of this from all of you, a direct relationship between the ability to provide a level of government service that fosters economic community development. What impact do you think that those service cuts will have on your ability to regenerate your economy, and what other assistance has been provided to what else are you thinking about in that regard? So again, we'll go to Mayor Pacifico first.
I think just to answer the last part of your question first, Altoona is the only municipality, the only full service municipality in Blair County that has a full-time police and fire department. So, just that in itself, is peace of mind for some folks to want to move into the city where they have, they have a response time of 3 minutes till a fire truck is pulling up to their home or their business. I think to answer the rest of the question, like I said, with so much of our budget being dedicated to public safety, our community development department is really one of the few places that we have left to cut from. And so much of the economic development that takes place within the city stems from the community development department. The redevelopment authority is housed within the Department of Community Development. So that's going to be affected, and so we're going to see a lot of. It's not just going to be a direct. You're going to see a fallout that ripples and has a greater effect far beyond what we can see right now.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Green, please.
Thank you, Rick. When I listened to the commentary from my colleagues on this call, a number of cities were doing really well prior to COVID-19, doing a lot of robust economic recovery, economic development, bringing people back to their cities. But due to this pandemic and the loss of revenue, we've had to make some major cuts, especially in areas like our commerce and economic development. Our commerce department was decimated. I took about an 85% cut because we had to do and make those hard choices of making sure we still had the resources we need for public safety and trying to maintain as many employees as possible to give and deliver those basic services. So when you have those type of major cuts in these type of departments in all of these cities, that are represented on this panel and around the Commonwealth, is going to make it even harder for us to come out of this pandemic and economic crisis, because we just don't have the tools to help businesses rebound. And so that's a double-edged sword of the lack of resources. Not only will we be hampered from our ability to help businesses, we won't have the ability to do so, but we don't have the resources, which also will not allow us to grow revenue in our city, because we can't help the businesses that are based in our cities.
Councilmember, you froze up there, so if you were done, we'll go from there. Mayor Sarachi, if you would, please.
So I think part of our decision making is predicated on what are expenses that we have to address. And one of the major expenses that we have on the horizon relates to a consent decree from the EPA related to stormwater and stormwater pollution. And so, you know, my other colleagues who may not be in the Chesapeake Bay watershed may not have these same kinds of issues, but we are trying to unravel a situation that was created when the city was created 300 years ago. And that federal consent decree is not going to go away. And so what we are, what I'm trying to wrap my head around is how there will be a direct loss of services that will result in a less quality living in the city of Lancaster. And that is a significant consideration as a mayor who is very concerned about quality of life, particularly in our neighborhoods and as well in our downtown. So that's one consideration that as we look ahead and think about how we're going to address revenue shortfalls, is that we're going to be prioritizing things that are mandated and that aren't addressing quality of life issues. The second thing is that, like many of our sister cities across the country, COVID is not the only crisis that we're dealing with. We are one emergency away from complete financial catastrophe. We have worked so diligently, and the resources that we have put away to create a rainy day fund for emergencies will not last us through a recession or any in combination with any other emergency. This is what cities are dealing with. We are fortunate that we do have some kind of reserve to help manage the fallout from this, but that reserve was built up over a decade. A decade it took us to get to that point. That goes away. We have one more emergency, one more crisis. I mean, you know, 2020's thrown a lot at us as cities, and we're dealing with a lot of very important and tough topics related to racial equity, related to how we police and provide services. The level of service and the demand for the service is not going away, but the revenue is. And any future emergencies are going to directly impact our ability to respond.
Thank you, Mayor Sarachi. Mayor Panto, please.
Thank you, Rick. I think all the other mayors and council members said it best. When I look at it, when I meet with my staff every day on the finances and where we're going, I've coined a phrase that it's like looking through a crystal ball that's cracked. The goalpost is constantly moving. We don't know what this COVID-19 is really going to do. We know what it's done to our revenues today. But right now we're working on the 2021 budget, which begins January 1. And it's very difficult. We present to City Council tonight our revised 2020 budget, which is reducing revenues and cutting expenses. And we're still probably about $1.5 million short. So that has to be financed somehow with next year's losses as well. And every city from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia to Pittston is dealing with the same thing. I think the problem we have is, I think Mayor Sarachi said it best, this is just one of many crises that came up in 2020. We had flooding in Easton last week. We had no reason to understand that we're going to have flooding. Flooding occurs when you least expect it, and it did. Our Bushkill Creek, and it's all because of stormwater mismanagement in the suburbs. Everything flows into our natural trout-producing stream and floods the area. And our Lehigh and Delaware rivers weren't flooded, but our Bushkill Creek went over its banks and really created havoc for Easton. Fortunately, our 81 employees that were furloughed were brought back on Monday, and the flooding occurred Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So we were very fortunate at that, but it shows you how important public employees are, because the other mayors and council members have said the same thing. Without the employees, we can't deliver the services. And I think next year's probably going to be as difficult, if not more difficult, than 2020, trying to resolve it between now and the end of the year.
Thank you, Mayor Panto. Appreciate it. Mayor Peduto, please.
You know, dear friend of mine, Richard Friedberg, former mayor of Meadville, used to say, we have the same problems that you have, you just have more zeros. And it's very true. The problems that all of our cities are facing, not only throughout Pennsylvania, but throughout this country, are the same. You know, it wasn't that long ago, basically 15 years ago, where Pittsburgh's bond rating was at junk bond status. We had a debt ratio of over 20%. Over 20% of our budget just went to paying off the credit card. And we had no reserve fund, not some, we had zero. There was nothing in for a rainy day. We've rebuilt that. We have, as of the beginning of this year, nearly 20% a reserve fund. Our debt is less than 10%, and our bond rating is the highest it's been since the collapse of steel. As of today, our reserve fund is gone. We have spent our entire reserve fund in order to pay the bills. Now, as we look at what next year will look like, let us just look at one area, just salaries, just paychecks. Out of a $600 million budget, that comes out to about $250 million. About 43% of our entire budget just goes to paying salaries of our employees. What will it look like without federal assistance? If we do a 10% cut across the board, fire, police, finance, planning, just to get started, we'll save 25 million out of $100 million deficit. 400 people losing their jobs, operations in this city having to be cut, and it only gets us to 25% of what our deficit is. That's the type of reality that we are facing. That's the type of reality without a national plan that directly benefits cities, that cities throughout this country will be in. Let me be very clear about this. There will not be an economic recovery if we allow our cities to go bankrupt.
Thank you, Mayor Peduto. Appreciate it. Now I'm going to pose the question, the last question, we'll get to Q&A, but I'm going to ask each one of you to speak directly to our United States senators and our congressional representatives and indicate to them what you would like them to include in this final package. Mayor Pacifico.
So yeah, I would like to see support that helps us replace the lost revenue so that we can continue to provide public safety to our constituents who are also their constituents as well. I think that's important for people to remember that, that we share constituents. Cities are not a special interest group. We are not, you know, a trade association or anything like that. We serve the same voters that they do, and we are asking them for assistance. You know, I'm grateful for the assistance that they have provided for us thus far, but there's only so much PPE that we can stockpile and other COVID-related expenses that we can use this money on before it becomes unusable. So we really need a way to replace the revenue that we lost through income tax, real estate tax, gross receipts, local services, things like that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Green, please.
If I could directly speak to members of Congress, I would say that we need resources that's flexible, without strings, that allows us to make up for the lost revenue that was due to no fault of anyone's own, but due to this COVID-19 pandemic, which has been
Councilmember, you
provide police services or other services, the other services that we have in our city. So I would say that make sure that the resources are
Thank you.
and that all people will be impacted when we don't have these resources, regardless of your voter registration.
Thank you, council member. Appreciate it. Mayor Sarachi, please.
We appreciate the additional CDBG funds and ESG dollars that have flowed through the city of Lancaster, and those are going directly right back out the door. There are a tremendous amount of restrictions on the utilization of those funds, which we understand and appreciate those needs. We've been supporting our local business community and making sure and advocating for changes to PPP, the continuation of that, unemployment benefits, and so on. We have been standing side by side with our business community and our residents to get them the resources that they need, whether that's food, moratorium on evictions, and so on. And now we need your direct support to support the cities like Lancaster and those across Pennsylvania as our congressional delegation, as our U.S. senators and our congresspersons. We have been a critical part of the response to COVID. We have been, Lancaster City was the first municipality in the state of Pennsylvania without a public health department to begin contact tracing and aggressively helping to contain the spread of COVID here in our community. Every additional sector that has constituents has been supported, and now we need your support. And we are counting on you to help us deliver the essential services that every resident, regardless of political affiliation, relies on every single day across this Commonwealth.
Thank you, Mayor Sarachi. Mayor Panto, please.
I think Mayor Sarachi said it best, is about mayors and local officials did not have a whole lot to do with managing COVID. We have our responsibilities after it's over. And what have we done? In Easton, we've done the business recovery plan and helping businesses, small businesses, to get back on their feet. And that's what we've used the CARES Act for, the additional CDBG funding, et cetera. If I could go to Washington today, and all of you know that we've all been there, we feel, I think Mayor Pacifico, you're absolutely right. When I go to Washington, I feel like I'm a special interest group. I'm big pharma. I am not representing local residents like they think I don't know what they think. I would tell them to get rid of the freaking aisle that's in the middle of that Congress. It's not a political issue, it's a people issue. Go on each other's side of the aisle. It's not the DMZ. Go in and talk and get this resolved. It's not a big issue politically, it's a big issue for people. We have people who are suffering, and they need to come into our cities and see that firsthand. They need to see what we deal with. And they also need to understand that every one of us on this call has to present to our legislative bodies a balanced budget. We don't have the choice. We can't print money here. We have to present a balanced budget, and that's going to mean next year cuts, and more cuts. So I would ask them to look at the cities as partners, not as special interest groups. And I think together, as in partnership, this country can come out of COVID-19 stronger. We won't just survive, we'll thrive. And that's really important to all of us, whether you're in Washington or in one of our cities in the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Panto. Mayor Peduto, if you will, please.
I would ask that Congress would understand that all of our cities, no matter how many people live in them, small cities and large cities, are facing an historic loss of revenue. And the bills that were passed earlier do not address this issue at all. Instead of trying to find ways to sidestep the issue by pointing to funds that were allocated to states or counties, we need to have a solution that directly funds cities without attachments that make it impossible in order to make up the deficits that we are all facing. When we look at this, we're not looking at it as a handout that will be on a continuous basis. We're looking at it as a bridge to help us get through a national crisis. The same that we would look at it as a hurricane or any other natural or man-made disaster. We have a disaster that is occurring throughout our country, and it needs a national solution.
Thank you, Mayor Peduto. Appreciate it. I thank you all for that. I want to just take a second on a couple of points. We are the Pennsylvania Municipal League is a nonpartisan organization. You've heard from Republicans and Democrats. They're all part of it. And we've heard what Mayor Panto just said in terms of bridging that aisle. And so we work with our partners at the National League of Cities at the federal level in a very nonpartisan way. I do want to recognize, though, one effort, and this is the kind of effort that we would, again, encourage. Senator Casey wrote a letter that he got 36 of his colleagues to sign, just really promoting what you just heard today from all of our members. And we really appreciate that leadership. And again, we need both sides of the aisle, but I need to recognize that effort. We need more folks to do that. And I want to thank him for that. And hopefully we can get more and more effort from both sides of the aisle. So we appreciate it. So members of the media, if you have a question, go into the chat, put your name. Debbie Bidding, our Director of Communications, will call on you, and one of us will attempt to answer your question.
Okay, Allie Hayden, if you'd like to ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I'm just wondering what it's looking like for you as leaders when it comes to what you're being asked from the federal government to put forward a matching, or they would match whatever you're able to put forward. Some are saying 400, some are saying 8. No one had time to prepare for this in the budget. Is this even doable, or would this lead to pretty much bankruptcy for smaller cities?
I'm sorry, this is the first time I'm ever hearing about some kind of federal match requirement. Is that what we're talking about?
It was an idea put forward from Congress, but if you haven't heard of that, what are you guys looking at budget wise with how to handle this if the federal government doesn't get involved with helping pay for some of these programs that you guys are trying to put forward?
We're looking at budget cuts, Hayden.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and just to go to the match thing, I'm sorry, that is like unbelievable. Match with what? We're already putting all of it in, all of it. We have to pass a balanced budget every single year. And so I'm not sure how that would even work. And as how we're going to deal with a revenue loss, I will speak for myself. We will eliminate and have no emergency funds necessary, and there will be a reduction in services. That's how we'll have to deal with it.
And just quickly to follow up on Mayor Sarachi, I mean, what's going to happen is that people are going to get hurt. People are going to have to get laid off. That's going to have an impact on the economy for cities like Philadelphia and all the cities represented on this call. That's going to have an impact on the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a whole. Philadelphia, Altoona, Easton, Pittsburgh, all these cities are not islands. They're connected to other maybe smaller municipalities close by. These are regional centers that provide resources that our employees and our citizens work not only in our city, but outside the city. And we're going to have major cuts, and it's going to be major pain for citizens around this Commonwealth if we do not receive revenue reimbursement from the federal government.
If I may, Hayden, are you referring to the executive order with the 25% state, the state option to fund 25% of the unemployment cost? Is that the match you're talking about?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So that's a little different animal than what we're talking about in the direct funding and the stimulus. That's really a state decision. I guess I'll just say that I have no idea what Pennsylvania is going to do right now, but that's on the unemployment side. I don't know that it's not going to be helpful because the state is looking at a $4 billion deficit, but that's not really, that doesn't directly affect what we're talking about in this stimulus 4 package and direct aid to communities. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next question from Justin Schweitzer with PLS Reporter.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Not sure who this question might be best for. I think Rick, you might be a good option here, but is there a ballpark estimate?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Is there a ballpark estimate that you think, just I guess a ballpark figure in terms of total aid that local governments across the state are going to need? I mean, do you have an idea of what that figure needs to look like?
Well, if I say a number, I could be bargaining against us, right? Because there's a number in the original, the HEROES Act that came across from the House. There's numbers been discussed. We've seen some formulas. So I don't want to put a number on the table that I would then say, okay, we would settle for that number. So maybe I wasn't the best person to answer it, but I really don't think any of us should put that, because if there's going to be a negotiated number between where that is and what could come out of the Senate, we obviously want it to be as high as it can be. We don't want to be an afterthought. We want to make sure there's a significant number that goes in for local government. So maybe that's the best I can do in answering your question.
Okay, thank you. Gillian McGoldrick from Lancaster newspapers.
Hi, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my question, definitely if Mayor Sarachi, you'd be able to answer this, but really it's for everyone. So Senator Toomey put out a statement today noting that much of the CARES Act dollars were sent directly to large counties or to the state have yet to be spent according to a recent Treasury report. And Rick, you had said that at the beginning of this that these cities have largely gotten nothing to date. So how much have you gotten from the state or local governments at this time, and for what purposes can you use those dollars?
Thanks, Jillian. So I'll start and then others can add in. The county of Lancaster received $95 million in coronavirus relief funds as part of the CARES dollars. Those dollars are allocated specifically for costs associated with COVID and the COVID response. There is a portion of those funds, I think it's, I don't know, I'm going to say, and I can get you the correct number, $300 and some thousand that has been allocated to the city of Lancaster as it relates to costs, COVID-related costs specifically. When Senator Toomey was here in Lancaster, we spoke about the fact that there are unallocated funds through CARES dollars, through the CARES Act and the disbursement of those dollars that have not been spent. There is currently a deadline to spend those funds by December 31st, and there are a number of restrictions that preclude those funds being utilized for the needs that we are talking about here today. And so if there are changes, again, to the guidelines for the utilization of those funds, by all means, let's use those dollars. And I also think that we are not out of the woods yet in terms of the money that we are going to need to spend to respond to COVID. Right now, we nationally not doing so great. Locally, doing okay, but our kids aren't starting back in school here in Lancaster because our positivity rate hasn't been consistently under 5%. So those dollars and reallocating them to the city's needs, we are commingling. We're distracting ourselves by saying we all have this money already, you should be using it. Well, we're doing two things here. We're responding to COVID, and we are trying to respond to the basic delivery of services that every community in Pennsylvania relies on their local government to provide. Does that help?
Yes, yes, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on. Try to get a few more. Gabriella DeLuca with WPXI.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and I apologize if you can hear my 5-month-old twins in the background. They're not very
You can
happy.
hear your entire family, Gabriella. That's great.
Yeah. Yes. So this question is for Mayor Peduto. I just want to make sure I am understanding this correctly. The 400 potential jobs that I guess could be cut throughout the city, is that something that would be a direct reaction to not getting federal funding, or is that something that's actually like in the works right now?
I have to present a budget to City Council in September. And we're in discussions right now with Council on having a delay until November in order to see where Washington goes and what our reality is regarding our revenue for next year. If we were to have to present a budget at this moment, we would be $100 million short, meaning that the amount of revenue that will come in for next year will be $100 million less than the revenue, than the bill of paying. If we were to lay off 400 employees across all departments, 10% reduction through every department, that would make up around $25 million out of that 100 million. It wouldn't even come close to filling the hole. It's the reality of where we are. And as far as what Senator Toomey said about this money at the county or at the state, the county and the state are facing massive deficits as well. They're not, you know, if the state were to just keep the 1.2 billion that they had, they're still facing another $3 billion in the hole. The county has received 212 million. 212 million. The city of Pittsburgh is over a fourth of Allegheny County. We've received 6 million of that. The senator voted on these bills. He knows that the money is not coming to the cities. And yet he is going to allow hundreds of firefighters and police officers to lose their jobs.
Okay, thank you.
I believe we have, Rick, do we have time for one more question?
Sure, let's take one more. This will be the last one.
Okay, Bill Kibler with Altoona. Mayor, do you want to go on the second part of your question there? Pose that?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
John Joyce, the state rep or the U.S. representative, said the other day to a similar kind of question that this event has raised, that Governor Wolf should just pay the money out of what the state has now. Is that a realistic request, or are there restrictions that keep him from doing that to help the cities with the CARES Act money?
Bill, Mayor Pacific, I don't know if you want to say anything, but I'll just say it. What Mayor Sarachi just said and what Mayor Peduto just said are the answers to that, which is that could they do that, and could it possibly be helpful? Yes, maybe, but it doesn't answer the overall question. And the state has a $4 billion deficit. And so given the restrictions on the CARES Act and the spending by 12/31, what Mayor Peduto just said, they've got their own issue. We need to have our direct funding to cities themselves. It is not going to answer, it is not going to be the answer to the problem. We need to have direct funding.
I would just add that Yes, because it has to be direct to the local governments because like we've seen in Blair County, Blair got $11 million in CARES funding, and of that 11 million, they allocated 800,000 for the municipalities within Blair County to buy for. So that doesn't leave us a lot of options whenever we're not included as stakeholders in the discussions of how those dollars get spent or allocated. So that's why it's important that we have the direct funding to go right to the municipalities themselves.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Bill, for the question. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to our partners at the National League of Cities. Thank you to the media, and thank you to the leadership of the Pennsylvania Municipal League, all our mayors and council members. It was good opportunity to talk. Let's hope for the best over the coming weeks, that we see a stimulus for. Thank you all very much.